Okay.
All right. It's now 1:32. I'm going to try and start the meeting now. For those of you who are in attendance, please be aware we are recording this meeting and we plan to post it on the commission's YouTube channel after the fact. If you don't want to be recorded, please hop off the call. For those of you who are not official members, I would ask that you please put your name, your affiliation in the chat. And then also during the meeting, if you wish to talk, please put that in the chat. I've set aside 10 minutes at the end of the meeting for non-member discussion. And then in comment. And if during the meeting it makes sense for me to bring somebody in based off of the member's needs, I might do so. All right, with that, I will go through the member list. Hello, my name's Ben. I'm chair of the EVSE work group, and I'm also the PSC's representative to this work group here. Start with is Senator Hettleman online.
I am here.
Thank you. Is Senator Watson online? All right. Do I have Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo? Delegate Allen. All right. All right. From the Department of Agriculture, do I have Allison Wilkinson?
Hello, I'm here.
Thank you. Comptroller's Office.
This is Ben Miller. I'm standing in for Lindsay Walsh with the Comptroller's Office.
Okay. Just repeat who it's Ben Miller.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Amanda Hine with MDOT.
Hi, this is Amanda Hinn with MDOT.
And thank you, Amanda. All right. MEA, did you decide who the official representative is going to be?
So the official one is going to have to be me, Diego Lopez from
All right.
MEA.
All right, Diego Lopez. Thank you. All right, members of the. All right, is Scott Wilson present?
Yeah, I'm present.
Thank you, Scott. Paul Ruczynski.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Josh Cohen.
Present.
Thank you. And Matthew Chen.
Present.
Thank you. Right. We have 10, or we have 9 of our 13 members, 10 if we have Ben standing in for 10, so we do have a quorum. All right.
Also,
everyone,
I'll note this is Anthony Willingham from Electrify America. I am here.
Thank you, Anthony. Please put your name in the chat. All right. Thank you everyone for calling in. Members who I just called out, I want to give you each a minute to introduce yourselves, your interest in being in this work group, and I guess any service that you've done before do this. And then I'm going to give some time to Senator Hettleman, who was one of the key sponsors of the legislation that led to this work group, to talk us through her vision and goals for us, and then we'll dive into the rest of the agenda. So I guess Senator Hettleman, I'll start with you. You are.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, sorry, I'm not used to using WebEx. So good afternoon, everybody. Happy to see you and happy to be part of this group. I will tell you, I have not been too involved in this space, have learned quite a bit over the legislative session and talking with many of you and my colleagues. And so I'm excited to learn more. Part of the impetus for the idea behind this was hearing from our constituents about frustrations they have in the owners of electric vehicles, as well as those who are not purchasing electric vehicles because of their frustrations with the current infrastructure. And the more I dug into this, the more we realized how many different agencies have responsibilities and different entities have responsibilities for oversight, and there doesn't seem to be a seamless coordination among different parties. And just for this one small piece of this, which is the stations and the oversight responsibilities for making sure that those stations are up and running and being as efficient as possible to help consumers, the environment, etc. We all have very ambitious goals for making our world a cleaner and less energy gobbling place. And so I'm hoping that what we come out of this process will help us get there in a more coordinated and functioning way. So look forward to the work ahead and to learning from each of you has some great expertise. So just looking forward to this collaborative process. We have a pretty short timeline. So, we have a lot of work to do, and I know it's summertime, and I know I'm in and out of town a ton, like I'm sure the rest of you are, but, excited to do this work. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Senator. All right, Josh, you're off. You're on camera, so I'm going to pick you next.
Hey, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Josh Cohen. I lead policy engagement for Switch, SWTCH. You can see it. There's no I in Switch. We're an EV charging solutions provider with a focus on energy management solutions for multi-tenant properties. I've been working in this space for about 6 years. I'm very happy to be a part of this group, and I appreciate the state's focus on having consistent uniform standards for supporting a really good charging experience across the different state agencies. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Matt, would you like to go next with Blink?
Sure, thank you very much. Matthew Chen with Blink Charging in Bowie. We're a Maryland-based EV charging manufacturer and network services provider. We're definitely interested in supporting a reliable EV charging network across the state and nationwide, and we certainly understand the reasons for why this important discussion is taking place. We just are committed to making sure that those are done in a way that supports a growing network and also enables the industry to grow effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll go to our two public members. Paul, would you like to take that lead off?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm a member of ZVIC, and I'm a longtime EV driver. My first car I bought in November of 2012. So I've seen the issues with reliability, operation, and I've been a member of Ben's EVSE tariff group looking at what should be done for MUDs. I'm focusing basically on the customer experience, which has really not been that great. And, if somebody's going up to a charger and it's not working, that is a definite negative. And I'd like to see Maryland be at the forefront of reliability. And a lot of these recommendations focus on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Scott?
Yeah, hi. I'm Scott Wilson. I'm Vice President of the Electric Vehicle Association of Greater Washington, D.C., and I'm also on ZVIC along with Paul. And yes, I also want to keep the customer experience foremost. And so if this work group is successful, what I would like to see is Maryland start to get a good reputation for being reliable, for fixing problems when they occur. It's not that problems won't occur and we should hide them. We should address them when they happen. And this is all going to exist within the larger reliability issues that NEVI, the NEVI framework. So I think as much as possible, we should harmonize with what's going on with NEVI. But I'm a longtime EV driver, and we need to always remember that it's going to be somebody's first day that they just bought a car and they want to go plug in. They're all excited, and we can't guarantee a good experience, but we can make a good experience a lot more likely. So I think that's what we should be doing. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Scott. All right, I'm going to run through the state agencies, starting with myself. So hi, my name's Ben. Been with the PSC about 6.5 years, in the energy industry about 10. I've had the privilege of leading our utility-focused EV work group for about now a little over 1.5 years. Got to wrestle with some of the issues that this group is going to be wrestling with shortly, related to reliability. And so anyways, I'm looking forward to, I guess, expanding our horizons to now also thinking about not just utility charger reliability, but what that means also for all public charging stations, so EV drivers have a better experience and are more incentivized to continue to pursue this the opportunity of electric vehicles. All right, turning over to over to the Department of Agriculture. Rachel or Allison, go ahead.
Thank you, Ben. I'm Rachel Jones. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Maryland Department of Agriculture. And our focus here is making sure that we coordinate with the other agencies to ensure that the role that the Maryland Department of Agriculture plays in regulating EV chargers for consumer protection continues to remain as it is. And policy is my background, and that's where I'm most effective in working on the legislation. And Allison is our subject matter expert and can answer more technical questions as we go about this work group. You're muted, Ben.
Of course, I'm sorry. I'm getting you. We usually use Google Hangouts, but to record the meeting, I switched over to WebEx. So, yes, go ahead, Ben Miller with Comptroller's Office.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I am the Chief Auditor in the Compliance Division of the Maryland Comptroller's Office, responsible for an audit staff that audits for various taxes that are administered by the Comptroller. Obviously, EVs, there is a tax implication, and we would be responsible to administer that tax. And again, I am here because of a scheduling conflict, sitting in for Lindsay Welsh. I'm happy to do whatever we can do to hopefully make clear what our responsibilities and requirements would be in administering the tax once it's been identified and put to paper. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, MDOT. Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, everyone. This is Amanda Hin with MDOT. I'm the manager for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. So I appreciate Scott Wilson's comments about the outcomes of this work group, harmonizing the reliability standards with NEVI. MDOT as a whole is interested in increasing reliability for Maryland EV drivers. as MDOT leads a statewide vehicle electrification and charging infrastructure deployment strategy. So happy to be part of this group. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda. And then to finish it out, go ahead, Diego.
My name is Diego Lopez. I'm the section chief for clean transportation for Maryland Energy Administration. My background started with clean transportation and electrification around 2010, so seen a lot of changes in the industry. Really, our main goal being part of this working group is, of course, boosting EV and charging adoption through our rebates and a better framework. So it's really great to get feedback on that framework, on our plans, on how to design a more robust charging network. But we also want to see who do we need to collaborate with and what are the future proofing best practices that we should stick to and adhere to. So I'm really excited to be a part of the working group.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So we've been tasked with three very specific objectives. Those are we need to develop a regulatory framework related to public charging stations, and I would say primarily related to the reliability of them, and that's what you will see as we go through it. But effectively, how we would basically think about how they should be regulated in terms of uptime standards and maybe a couple other items. We also, if such a framework is promulgated in legislation later, we would need to say who is responsible for the regulatory framework, and that could be different parts or segmented out to different state agencies as implied by Senator Hettleman, and we'll have that discussion. For example, I think the most obvious would be the Department of Agriculture and Handbook 44 related to accuracy of these charging stations. And we'll talk through that as well. And then finally, we'll call it the rules, thinking about kind of the minutia, the details around determining uptime, enforcement, and other things that would be important for overseeing these public charging stations. And so in order to do so, those are the three tasks we have been given, and we are to deliver a report on those three items to the legislature by let's see, November 1st of this year. So yes, time is of the essence. So our first meeting is today, and my goal for us to get from point A to point B is that we would basically have, I'll say, a standing meeting every other week. The goal would be that that group meets for 1 to 2 hours. I would put it on our calendars as a 2-hour meeting. If we don't use the whole time, we don't use it. Also, if we think that we need to talk more on issues, I'm happy to extend meetings. Preferably, we have that discussion ahead of meetings, and we would schedule it as such. But that is my thought in terms of how we're going to get there. My goal is that we would have a first draft in your hands around mid-September for review. That's basically about 2.5 months from now. And so when that first draft circulates, there might be a couple issues that we are still talking through, but the goal would be that we are definitely locking things down by then and more focused on drafting what that report would look like. And then towards the middle of October is when you would get the final draft for review, comment, and vote. And then I've basically left us a week buffer there, a couple days, really no buffer at this point, just because we have so much time. We only have so much time to just make some short changes to get this in by the 1st of October. Let me see if I can see. Give me 1 second. So anyways, that is the current my current schedule. Any questions, issues, concerns with said schedule? We'll get into the exact date for the meeting in a minute. But thoughts or questions? Also, I cannot see anyone right now, so if you would like to speak up, just please speak up. Figure out how to see everyone.
Hey Ben, it's Josh.
Go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
From a scheduling standpoint, I mean, the schedule seems to make sense given the legislation that requires the report back by November. I just want to flag that the amount of work that we need to come to consensus on is basically 2 months to achieve to come up with the initial draft. And a lot of these specific issues that we're tasked with addressing, any one of them is like in other proceedings and rulemakings is 6 months or 12 months or more. And so I think figuring out the mechanics of how we as a work group actually work to address and try and achieve consensus, I think will require some, focused conversation. I think it'll be, just at first blush, I think it'll be infeasible as a full work group to address each one of these, have a full discussion. We may need to go into this with the understanding that some of us will be working on this kind of on the side, coming back to the full group. I don't know, but I'm not sure how we'll achieve the full scope of what we need to cover in a couple months. So I'm sure we can. I just wanted to put that out there that it'll be a really big challenge.
I agree with you. And I think some of this, especially if you go through the list of items that we've been asked to address under, I'm going to put it grouping 3, which is the details. Some of that I'm going to, as we go through it in the next couple of weeks, would be asking parties, is this something that we need to comment on, or is it something that if we decide it needs to be acted upon, it would be left for the implementing agency, versus what can we point to inside of NEVI versus work that the PSC has done as a guiding principle for the implementing group. So as a way, and that's, I'll get into that in a minute, but yeah, I'm hoping that we can kind of come up with a guiding principles where we say, this is when we give our recommendations, this is what helps inform it. And then underneath that is, what do we as a group think needs to be addressed versus left up for the implementing agency versus doesn't really need to be talked about. And I think it will, obviously that'll be the group members of the group will have to discuss and agree with that. Then also on top of your comment about outside work, yes, I guarantee you there will be some of that. I actually have 2 fabulous interns who've actually been already helping me with some of this. One has been focused on doing a survey of other state jurisdictions, and he's actually going to talk to us a bit today about what other jurisdictions have been doing with this. And then another has been focused, I asked him to look into the business models behind the electric vehicles and write up a little white paper, or not vehicles, but charging stations. Because at the end of the day, we're here because for some reason it's not economic or for some weird reason, companies are not keeping these things working 100% of the time. So the question I had for him is, what is the business reason for that? And so I've asked him to write that up, and I'll have that actually circulating with the group for feedback and thoughts of other places for him to look. But anyways, yes, we will be having, I think, some of those side conversations. Go ahead, Scott. I saw you come on screen.
Yeah. I would suggest that we prioritize the requirements under 951. I mean, there's a whole list of subjects to hit, but they're not all equally weighted. For example, I mean, the reliability, that's the biggie, but rules on defining payment options or certification requirements for installers. I mean, NEVI handles a lot of that already. So we need to prioritize what we want to be focusing on, which I think you've got a good start on. And because and we might have to break up into subgroups or something, because there's going to be some mathematics involved in this, and also reporting, like accessing the overall picture of the network. You have to know what chargers are not working, but you also have to know what chargers are working in order to get the right number for reliability. So it's going to involve a little bit more detail than has been put into the question of reliability so far. So
No, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, we do have different issues with public chargers. The level 2s, for example, at least from what I hear and see, are not an overriding issue. But the DC fast chargers are. And, we should probably put our emphasis on that, because that's where people go when they're traveling or if they need a charge in a hurry.
Yes. So basically different priorities within the rules we come up with. and also priorities in terms of what this group addresses. All right. So before we get, I think we will get a little into this ranking of issues here more towards the end of the meeting, or starting to think about how to rank that. Any other comments on the draft schedule? It sounds like there might be some appetite to do some outside work and subgroup work, which I'm happy to organize as we get going. So I will just note that.
Just organizationally, can you send out this schedule and as well as contact information for the group members?
Yes, I will make
an
sure
email,
you
that would
should
be
have this schedule. Yeah, I can definitely, I don't know if you all have each other's emails, so I will make sure after this meeting, everyone has their emails. And then if you all want to also circulate phone numbers with each other at that point, we can do that. And then the schedule you should have received ahead of the meeting. If you haven't, I will make sure you get it. I work in Excel a lot of the time, especially when I'm getting feedback from multiple people. And so if this format doesn't work, let's also talk about that, because that's usually how I circulate documents. But yes, I will make sure you have this again. Sure. All right. So standing meeting really quick before we go any further. This is a bit of housekeeping. I do there. So the three members I haven't heard from are not here today, so I'm gonna have to try and get a hold of them outside of the meeting. But I did a survey of everyone, and it seemed that the two most common times we could have a standing meeting were Mondays and Friday afternoons. And so everyone who did respond based off of the members, it seemed like Mondays from 1 to 3 or 2 to 4 were the that was a consensus time. I had one member who couldn't do Friday 1 to 3. So based off of that, subject to the missing members agreeing, I think we would set up a meeting for one of those two times. So I guess really quick, I know everyone said Mondays. Is everyone good with doing Mondays? That would mean I would be circulating information with you Thursdays and Fridays before the meeting, ahead of meetings. If not, or if you'd rather do this more during the business week, I would do it Fridays. But so Natalie, give me a thumbs up. So anyone opposed to Mondays, speak up if you're opposed. All right. So Mondays, the game plan will be 1 to 3. At the end of the meeting, everyone please think about when you would like to meet next. We don't answer that at this moment, but before the end of the meeting, we'll need to decide if we want to meet Monday, July 15th or July 22nd. So just keep that on the top of your mind, and I'll come back to that at the end. All right, let's start getting into the meat of this group. So walk through the framework issues for review. So as I said before, there's really 3 items, and we can maybe bundle them under 2. One is a regulatory framework, and one is really guiding rules for that framework. And so what I've done is pull together a straw man of both of those for you all to work through. Well, for all of us, to walk through. And it's something that I will send around for you all to work on outside of the meeting, give me feedback on, and then we can all talk through it together at the next meeting. But just I'll walk you through what I have now and what I was thinking, and then we can talk through that. So for the framework side of things, I've broken it up into 7 or 8 categories. And I should also say before we keep going, I have run the framework previously by state agencies to try and make sure that this was a little more flushed out than just my initial thoughts back in June. So anyways, I think the main issue is, or one of the first issues we're going to need to address is who is subject to said framework. Breaking it down, I've broken it down between private use cases and public use cases, and then also just asking for others to think of things that they would add. So private use cases, these are your personal use cases at MUDs and at single families. These would be private companies. These would be possibly things, group charging stations at MUD that aren't really available for public use. Workplace charging for employees, maybe. But thinking through, and these are the ones based off of what the law says, I would argue might not be under our framework because the revised law gives exceptions where non-commercial purposes, the charging company is not, we are not setting up rules for those. But that's something for you all to think about so that when we come up with a definition of a group of what is involved, that we appropriately capture who should or should not be inside of it. Public use cases that I've come up with and based off of some feedback were those who are selling electricity are obviously within the public use case. The utility public charging stations, storefronts, charging networks, anything where a member of the public can easily get to it probably somehow falls under this. So trying to define that. And so we would love to hear feedback if you agree with these, if there's ones you would like to add. Any questions about this is the first point of the framework, which is who would fall under it. All right. Next issue would be once we identify who should be subject to it, it's figuring out how to know who they are. So we have a grouping of there will be new chargers installed in the future, and there will be ones that exist that we need to make sure they know that these rules would exist for. And so the question would be, how do we register them? How do we get them? How do we inform them of this? The law allows for some lead time for this to become effective for existing chargers. And so we'll need to talk through what that might mean. After registering, we would obviously need to, in order to enforce anything, I need to track that. I need to find out a way to monitor it. So this would be data tracking, reporting. Should we be doing it? How much of it should we be doing? That kind of stuff. And this might be getting to the area where we as a group need to decide how much of a heavy touch do we have in our initial discussions now versus how much would be left up for an implementing agency. But probably just talking through what are all the considerations that need to go into such a mechanism. In California will be probably a good example of somebody we can look to on this area, because this is what they've spent my understanding is the last 3 years trying to wrestle with. And then enforcement. So this would be the subject of, okay, if I've set rules and you haven't followed them, what does that mean? A certain jurisdiction, such as the UK, they just say you either meet my standards or I fine you. Versus others like California, their enforcement is really only tied to chargers that they are giving money to. And so this is thinking about, am I going to be proactive, reactive? How do I come at you if you didn't follow my rules? And that will be something that I think we definitely as a group will want to work our way through. After that, I think this gets really into who should be in charge. And this gets into the benefit, and this is going to be, we need to know materials. We need to know budgets, because if we're giving a recommendation to the legislature, they're probably going to want to know what's it going to cost. And so that we can make sure that this, and probably also we need to, and I didn't add a line, but I'll add a line now for this. We need to know where funding is coming from. So that might be that a fee that I assess every time somebody registers or something like that. So that might be something that we would have to talk through in terms of this. But this will be, I think, for the state agencies, what we'll need to think about. I will say one of the interns has been working on thinking about what is the need in the state for chargers. He's been doing a survey of studies, MEA and MDOT. I will be putting him in touch with you to kind of talk through the research he's been doing. So when we get to really thinking about budgets and how many units might be under this group's regulation, we can kind of use that to scope out cost. So anyways, and then here were just some additional guiding item. And then some additional guiding items are give guidance, give deference to NEVI. So basically NEVI has been the gold standard in this area. It's what the utilities reliability standards were based upon. What MDOT actively uses. I plan to have MDOT and myself within the next meeting or two talk through what us as agencies have done with NEVI and what may or may not make sense to bring into this area, and to maybe talk through some of the struggles that we have been having when we've had those discussions. Because there are certain nuances inside of NEVI that were interesting to run into once we started talking about implementation. And then obviously this kind of falls under business unit needs, administrative needs. We're going to have to decide how much of this falls under a single state agency versus multiple state agencies. So those are kind of, I would say, the 6 or 7 big framework items that I would say I'm putting under this idea of framework. Questions about them. I'm going to send you all have this, I'll resend it around afterwards. But when you're going through it, I'll be looking for feedback on, do you agree? Is this something you think and I'd say to what Scott and Paul were bringing up, let's have a discussion. Should we, we only have so much time to do stuff here. So what should we focus on? What don't you think we need to focus on? How much of this can we also just do in writing up ahead of time? If we all agree something needs to be dealt with, maybe we don't as a big group need to do it other than just check the box. So any feedback, if you think I'm missing something, let's get it on the list now. So that's something to think about also as this gets circulated. But if you have any feedback now, would love to hear it.
Yeah, this is Paul. Comment, how we structure this is going to make a big difference. There's multiple agencies. Ideally, what I would like to see is to have one responsible agency, and then they coordinate internally within the state for whatever is needed. I mean, having a customer trying to figure out where to go when there's a problem, I think is a bridge too far, in my opinion. So that's kind of my ball off the bat with what you've done, Ben. And by the way, a real good rationalization of all of this on how we might approach it. But that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'd like to have the customer experience there to the nth degree possible. So have at it, others.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. One other advantage for tying everything to NEVI is to make it as easy as possible on the network providers, because if they're already complying with NEVI, I mean, we can have additional requirements, but we have to calibrate those very carefully. So it's better just to make NEVI the default, and then if you want to do anything other than that, then you think about it. So.
Yeah, so basically when we walk through, and I'll get to that in a minute, this uptime measurement, starting with NEVI and then saying, okay, why would NEVI not work in this instance? And then going from there.
Yeah. Because if they're already complying with NEVI, they can argue that, hey, we're already complying, NEVI compliant. So, that should be enough. And they would have a point.
Yep. So thank you for that. And I think that, I guess I should write, we could maybe put under the framework. I don't think I put it in here, but I did. If it's not in there, we'll add it, exceptions. So which I think that kind of falls under who is in charge, who is subject to this, but kind of thinking through, okay, if you are receiving federal funds, you have to usually follow certain rules to receive federal funds. So we don't want to accidentally mess up the state getting a charger by requiring you to do something different. Or maybe I say you follow the stricter of the two or something like that. And so, yeah, we can talk through exception. Like maybe when we're talking through the details, we also were talking about, is there anything where we need to maybe put a placeholder exception there?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. All right, so I'm going to hop over then into uptime measurement issues. And this is really not just uptime measurement. This is really, I think, a number of other items. But I think uptime, if you go through a lot of these, is at the core of it. And so this list, if you looked at SB 951, HB 1028, there was a long list of items that us as a group need to consider when we're going through this framework. But I would say these would be the things that you would wrestle with when deciding, is a charger working appropriately for the public? And so what I've done here is I've taken that and put that all into Excel in terms of the items, and then I reached out to MDOT, who gave me a list of how that correlated to what is required inside of NEVI. So we have the rules from NEVI next to it, and I also did my initial survey of what we as the PSC did a year ago in response to House Bill 834, which required us to set up reliability standards for the utilities charging stations. we're also supposed to be close to NEVI unless there was a reason to deviate. So there should, and so I've put both of those side by side. So when you're going through these, you can see what's said in NEVI, what we as the PSC did, and these are high level summaries I planned for myself and MDOT at a future date to really give you probably a more nitty gritty walkthrough of these. But as an initial setup so you can see it. And so that's throughout here. Scott, to your point, and so what I've done is I've also set up a feedback column for you to really tell us what are your thoughts about this. I think probably a good piece of feedback here in the beginning is what is the priority? Maybe I'll put a little priority scale in here for us, 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. That's like, how important is it that this group address it before this gets to legislation versus probably how much of this should be left up for the implementing agency to figure out. And that will help us guide what we as a group need to talk through. And then we could also, I would also love to hear feedback, especially from those who've had to implement NEVI or dealt with the utilities, where are some pitfalls that we need to be aware of. For example, on the charging station, we had a debate in front of the commission about were we setting the reliability standard at the station, which could have multiple charging ports attached to it, or was I setting the reliability standard at the charging port? NEVI says station, but if one of the ports doesn't work, a consumer might be frustrated. And so that was where NEVI wasn't the most clear on the issue. And so we had to debate that. And so that'd be the kind of feedback to hear. So from both those who've had to do this work in other places in private industry, need to hear from you. Like, we can write really strict standards, and then you'll tell us how we're killing the industry. So we want to maybe have those discussions now, not later, or at least start having those discussions.
Yeah, one thing we have to keep in mind is that I would like to see. I mean, I mentioned mathematics earlier, and so I was thinking about this, and I would like to see very, I don't want to say rigid, but we have to really think about the operational modes of a charger. For example, a port. So, well, first of all, we have to all use the same terminology. So under NEVI, the port is the big white box, and then the connectors are attached to the big white box. So one port can charge one car at a time. And so we need to make sure that we're all using the consistent terminology. And then the second thing is there are usage modes. So we need to start thinking in terms of if I just walk up to the charger, there are ways that I can make it work. First of all, there's like contactless payment. So I can have a network card, or I can tap it with my phone, or I can activate it from within the app. So those are two different usage modes. One can be working and one not working. And then there's also an 800 number on there. So I can call the 800 number and use a credit card. And, the 800 number could in principle not be working. It's probably going to be working. But so that's one port. So one with like a CCS connector. So there's 3 different ways to use that fast charger. And then if it has a CHAdeMO connector, now there's 6 ways to use it. So 3 ways for a CCS customer and 3 ways for a CHAdeMO customer. And I think we need to start thinking in terms of these modes of operation. And so then, for example, if there are 3 ways to use it and one of them is not working, is it up or is it down? So we're going to have to decide issues like that. And the PSC has already kind of done that, because with the ports, there was discussion earlier about if the CCS is working and the CHAdeMO is not working, is the station up or down? And the PSC's answer is it's down. And so then, because if it's up or down, that's going to go into the reliability number. And so I'm not saying, I'm just saying, speaking generally, we need to prepare ourselves to be thinking in terms of those very well-defined modes of operation.
No. And Scott, thank you for that. That is exactly the nuances we've had to wrestle with as a group. And actually, you bring up a good point. Definition, I think I spent at least one whole meeting with my previous work group debating that, so we got it right. To help stem me that at the beginning, maybe I will circulate where we ended up as a group, and then we can tinker with that through email. So when we get to the next group, we can have an agreed definition of network to charging station to port connector, so that we at least have a good view of it, so we're not talking past each other, because that did happen to me for a little.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's happened to me before a lot too. So
yeah. All right. Other comments, thoughts about measurement, uptime, things that would be helpful to you all before you start going through this over the next week or two? Happy to walk through the list if that is something. There is a lot there, and I wasn't ready to talk through each of those individually today. State agencies, you have been quiet. Is there anything on these two topics before I move on? Department of Ag, I might put you on the spot for a moment. In the next meeting, do you think you could talk about what you're doing in Handbook 44 and feedback you might like to hear from the group or the private industry on?
Definitely, and we could definitely discuss NIST Handbook 44, Code 3.40, which refers to electric vehicle fueling equipment systems. It has specifications, tolerances, and user requirements, as well as test procedures that we would follow within our department.
Awesome. So yeah, so I think maybe at the next meeting it would be helpful. Yeah, we'll have you do a presentation on what you're doing, because I think that's a very obvious one where you can say the ball's already in your court. Probably would make sense to keep it in your court, and how, and what you're doing there. If there's much that we need to talk about as a group, so kind of maybe think about that over the next week, and then we can talk about something to circulate to the group. And then we'll continue to focus on this issue of reliability.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see. All right. Go to my agenda here. All right. So I'm gonna guess right how long things are gonna take. All righty. So the next item I wanted to just talk through really quick is kind of brainstorm with each of you goals and guiding principles for the group. So we have our 3 statutory goals that we have outlined, which is basically the framework, who, and how. But I think now if we take it one step below, when we're having our discussions, thinking about, I'll say the principles of how we fill out our report and the principles about how we basically say if this is a good idea or not. So how we fill out the report, and I want to hear, like, these are just my initial thoughts. I would like you all to expand upon them or shrink them if you think appropriate. But thinking about, there were kind of 4 ideas I had. 2 of them related to, when we're having these discussions, basically the who and basically what should we legislate versus what is left up to the implementing agency. That would be 1. And then 2, thinking about what should be really codified through rulemaking - legislation versus something that might not really need regs. And so the reason those 2 are important is because obviously this will just be a report to the General Assembly, what we are developing here. But not everything that we are talking about needs to be put into that new law. That law would really need to make sure, obviously what's going to need to be in that law is who's in charge, and make sure they have the funding and the statutory authority to enforce whatever they come up with. But we would want to make sure that that group has guiding to get this done quickly. They have guidelines in terms of what makes the most sense. We just had a whole grouping of experts talk about this. And so that then gets into this issue of what needs to be done through rules versus what does not need to be defined. And that's kind of helping that agency get their feet under them more quickly when this lands in their laps after the next session. And then in terms of guiding principles, I kind of view it as when we're talking through the rules and the framework, I think what I'm thinking of my principles when I talk about this are one, that the chargers will work as advertised. If a charging station says it's open 24 hours a day and is going to deliver you 50 kilowatts of charge at a single go, then we want to know it's doing that. And if it's not, then what should we do? On the other hand, I also want to make sure that this isn't a nascent industry by any regards, but we do need more chargers. And I think if you talk to MDOT, you talk to a lot of people, we want more of these on the road. So as we're coming up with these rules and the process behind how I check things and enforce things, making sure that's not unduly hampering. I'm not saying not hampering. We're putting rules in place that is going to be a little bit of a temperance on the deployment, but I want it to be, we wanted to make sure that people don't fear putting chargers on the ground due to our rules. So just thinking about those were kind of my two when we talk about these rules and issues, what I think we should make sure to suss through. And I think using NEVI as a guiding principle will help because we know charging companies are paying attention to NEVI. But anyways, opening the floor for thoughts, that was just what was going through my head when I was coming up with it. So
I have also on that.
Go ahead,
Go
Senator.
ahead, Senator.
So I agree with both of those goals that you've articulated as kind of overarching frameworks. I also think and of course, being attentive to the companies and not wanting to overburden them. We all want more stations. We want more reliable stations, etc. I do think it's important for us to keep the consumer kind of front and center through all of this. So in the conversation you had about, kind of what does it mean to be up and fully functional? I think that we need to keep the consumer, that if the consumer has, 2 out of the 4 payment options or 0 out of the 4 payment options are working, that's important to the person who doesn't have access to those payment options, right? We don't want to make assumptions about how people are coming to stations. And I think we need to ensure that if anyone shows up, they have the ability to access them and have them functional. So, it goes to your point about we'll work as advertised, but I just want to make the point of consumer being front and center. Thanks.
Yep, that written down. Thank you. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on your legislation versus rulemaking, or both. My inclination is to do as much as you can in legislation in terms of specificity so that then you minimize rulemaking. I know that that's not usually done, although we did do that with net energy metering. We put some real specificity into it, and there wasn't very much in the rulemaking then that had to be done subsequently. And I'm looking at it from the standpoint of just a timing issue. Yeah, you do the legislation, but then it takes forever for rulemaking. And I would frankly like to cut down the time interval for getting this in place. And I think legislation is the most logical place to do that.
I'm also going to add time, and I'm going to add time to implement under our framework discussion. Even if that's not something we focus on strongly, it's something I think we do need to discuss. And Paul, I think there's going to be that stress of what goes into legislation versus, I guess, having been on the other side, also be getting legislation, making sure that what is there is flexible enough for that implementing agency, that as the market evolves and changes, that we don't have to come back and re-legislate the rules. And so thinking about how to do that while also making sure we get this group off the ground running. But yeah, no, I have that in the notes here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've done both for the feds, legislation and rulemaking, and I mean, for us, it was usually about a 3-year process. And getting the IRA parameters out to the states has taken almost 2 years. So I look at that, and having been involved with some of the rulemaking already in the state, I would frankly like to minimize the rulemaking if it can be done at all and the legislature comes on board with writing some fairly tight legislation.
Got it.
So if
Allison,
I'm
I saw you come up. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah. So if I may add, MDA Weights and Measures already actively investigates consumer complaints. We receive them on a daily basis in conjunction with weight measure count or devices that are not functioning properly. When consumers run across a problem at a gas station or grocery store, they call us, we go out and investigate. So we would be forefront in consumer complaints, investigating consumer complaints. Just as now when you go to a gas pump and you go to dispense your gas, you can see on the face of the gas pump our agency phone number as well as our sticker. People know who to call when they have concerns regarding that particular device. So we would definitely prioritize the consumer, ensuring that they are protected. I know that another one of the concerns is placing more chargers in the ground to be more accessible to consumers overall. My recommendation is if we could kind of get the word out that they need to be NTEP, that's NTEP, National Type Evaluation. Plan chargers, this means that these devices have been evaluated to conform to all specifications, user requirements within NIST Handbook 44. So we know these devices are going to be legal for trade from the beginning.
Got it.
And we
So
can discuss that more as we get into it, because I know that's a lot of information.
yeah, no, and I have a guy taking notes. So, but make sure I've hit it right. You have consumer front and center you agree with, then you're just highlighting that you have a consumer affairs department already focused on it. And then
Oh, you muted yourself, Ben.
sorry about that. Or we have a really laggy network right now. I think I hit mute like 2 minutes ago. So anyways, and then NTEP chargers, or is that is that chargers or is that equipment used to verify the accuracy of chargers?
No, that's actually, NTEP is going to be the actual chargers themselves. So just like with any
Okay.
other device, NTEP, Certificate of Conformance, or CC numbers, are granted after these devices are evaluated. So these devices are evaluated to ensure they're meeting technical requirements as laid out in Handbook 44. So just like the gas pump that you go up to or the grocery store scale that your checker's using to check you out and weigh your produce, those devices have NTEP Certificate of Conformance, as well as the software to initiate these devices, such as the point of sale software that works in conjunction with the small scale at the grocery store, or the point of sale software that works at the gas station to initiate the transactions. All of these particular devices have been evaluated by the National Type Evaluation Program and granted a certificate of conformance to ensure that they are meeting the correct criteria, making these devices legal for trade in the United States.
Awesome. Okay, so it's like a standard, sort of like there's but basically it's a standard for the chargers to meet, and that we can look at that for when we're talking through what our rules are around these stations.
That's correct.
So Allison,
Awesome.
are you aware of chargers that satisfy this now?
Yes,
Like,
I am.
for example, the EA chargers that the EA uses, Electrify America, are they
So it
compliant?
depends on the specific charger, whether they're compliant or not. So there will be a list on National Conference of Weights and Measures that can be obtained that will state which specific chargers have current NTEP certificate of conformance, making these devices legal for trade.
Okay.
So California is actively engaged, their lab, their NTEP lab is actively engaged in evaluating these devices for the National Conference on Weights and Measures. I've been to their NTEP lab, I have seen their NTEP lab, and they're actively engaged evaluating these devices, granting them the certificate of conformance through the National Conference on Weights and Measures.
Okay.
Hi, this is Anthony from Electrify America. I'm not aware of chargers that are not compliant with this standard.
Anthony, can you drop that in the chat? So I will. How we're running this group right now is it's open for members, and I have for non-members a time set aside at the end for them to speak. I will say my goal is that we will have some dialogue between those who are not members in this group over time as this keeps going. So, but in terms of traditionally, that's how I'm going to bring people in. So if somebody has something that they want to talk about, they think it's pertinent to the immediate conversation, it's not one of the members, please raise your hand, drop it in the chat, and I will decide to let you in or out of the conversation on that regard. Otherwise, we'll save it for the end. Thank you. All right. Josh.
Thanks. Just a couple kind of high-level thoughts thinking about the work of this group and what our final product will be. I think the first couple questions you outlined, Ben, at the top are really important, namely, what is the population of chargers that our recommendations are going to apply to? And it's a shift in thinking for me, at least, because so much of the work that people in my role do is aimed at shaping incentive programs and utility programs and state grants, right? Where there's there's a policy goal to support more equity or whatever the goals are, and to use the funding incentive as kind of a carrot to support that. Whereas my understanding of this work group and what we're supposed to come up with is really towards any publicly operating chargers or chargers that are dispensing electricity to the public at retail or something along those lines. And so it's more like the gas station or gas pump model, even though I'm reluctant to use that analogy, but it's like if you're a driver pulling up to any charger in the state of Maryland, regardless of whether it's incentivized by a utility program or a state grant or just private dollars putting it out there, like that's the basic standards that you as a driver should be able to expect is, ultimately going to be the work product of what we come up with and then gets implemented, at least as I understand this group and what our focus is. And so, but I think, as we have future meetings and we really lock down what is the population of chargers that this applies to, I think that's really a fundamental question that we should all be in alignment on is one thought. And then the other thought is kind of to counter Paul's point about the rulemaking, even though Paul, I share your concern about the length of time that some of these rulemakings and implementations can take. And maybe the answer is let's take it on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the specific standard is that we're thinking about, whether it should be more specifically codified in a rule or it should be statute. But just as a general principle, this industry is still in many ways very nascent. The standards are evolving, the expectations are evolving, and my concern is that if something is put in statute and it needs to be changed, that's going to be a much bigger challenge than updating a state agency rule, for example. So just wanted to share those couple thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. And then I think Delegate Fraser Hildago's in the waiting room. So if everyone give me 1 minute to see if I can figure out how to let him in. Sorry, I'm getting used to this meeting. Participants. 1 second. I don't see anyone in the waiting room. Senator, could you shoot him a message to make sure he's not trying to use a Google Meets, because I had to switch it out. I'll also I'll resend this to him really quick with the meeting information. Maybe he just needs to call
I'll let him
in.
know.
Thanks. All right, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna point out kind of what Josh was saying. It is helpful to think in the analogy with gas stations. So if a gas pump was not working, it would get fixed pretty quickly, and it's market forces that keep the gas pumps at a high level of reliability, because there's a lot of money changing hands, but the entire gasoline system is not subject only to market forces. So gas pumps are inspected and calibrated, and so there's kind of two different parts. So if you're thinking about rules versus laws, I agree with Josh. A law is kind of more inflexible than a rule. But the thing is that right now, I mean, we just passed 100,000 registrations, and so we are actually still in kind of a low utilization period of the charging infrastructure. And so right now, the rules have to serve the function of the market force that would be keeping the chargers at a high level of reliability. But once we have like 1 million cars, and then 2 million and 3 million, then there will be market forces that will enforce reliability. But until that time, that's what our task is. So I just wanted to.
No, thank you for that, Scott.
Yeah, it's just helpful to think in those terms, because you only have to think about how long would a gas pump be down before somebody would call it. Now, gas stations are structured differently, and there's someone on site, and so there's a whole bunch of other kind of dimensions to this. But just in general, it's helpful to think as the analogy.
Right, and that's actually, as I mentioned at the beginning, towards probably 30 minutes ago, one of our interns has actually been looking, and I asked him to look into the business model for charging stations to kind of help us think through, maybe, because to your point, arguably somebody should have an economic incentive to keep these things working 100% of the time. But if they're not, which apparently I would argue we're in this situation because they're not, trying to understand maybe why that is happening. And that would also then help us think through, when we get to the enforcement side of things, how we might approach that. So, got it. Did the delegate get into the room? Delegate Fraser Hildago. All right, so let's see.
He hasn't been back in touch with me. I don't know.
Got it. All right, I don't know what's happening. Sorry. That problem. All right. Any other questions on this before I go to our last topic, before I open it to the others on this call? All right. So I'm going to have one of our two interns, Philip. He did a survey of other, Philip, you can come up here. of other EV or other jurisdictions and what they've been doing on EVs, and in terms of reliability. So you're just going to do a quick 5-minute survey and of it for you, and then we'll send around the slide deck, which has a lot more in the appendix for you. So go ahead.
Hi all, my name's Philip and I'm doing some work here this summer. And here at the PSC we did some research and survey, like Ben said, about other areas and jurisdictions that have been doing work on EV charging reliability, and some intriguing things that we found. And primarily, slide here, we went over different states in the U.S., primarily California, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. And California has been dealing with EV charging reliability for the past 3-4 years detailedly, and they are implementing now some work, and I'm going to get into the details later, but implementing the legislation that's been passed there. In New York, there was legislation that went to the governor's office and was vetoed due to a different New York commission that he wanted to be she wanted to be ideally working on that. And in Connecticut and New Jersey, that legislation is pending and not yet implemented. And in UK and in Germany, in Europe, there has been implementation of EV requirements and reliability requirements. And the UK ones I'm going to get into in a slide here that are very fascinating. And just some present California requirement and guidelines that they have are, one, that in 2022 they had set a goal to install 25,000 EV chargers and 10,000 fast chargers by 2025, and their big requirements are of a 97% uptime requirement for state and ratepayer funded chargers by this year of January 1st, 2024, which complies with NEVI's 97% uptime requirement, and a SCAR, a successful charge rate goal of 90%, also this year, 2024. And then for UK, they have recently done a 99% reliability requirement and kind of uptime requirement, and how they are dealing with this is finding all public and private chargers of up to 10,000 pounds. But what my research has found is that the market cap and how that's working are these companies are welcoming these regulations, and the confidence that the consumers are growing in EV chargers is kind of paying dividends in the UK. And there's some more details down in the presentation, but thank you very much.
Any questions for Philip? Thank you, Philip. So yeah, so we'll get this survey sent, or this presentation sent around. We've got a lot of material in the appendix, as some of you can see. But anyways, I'm definitely going to recommend that we look at California and the UK as two models that we can consider as we work through this. California as the stateside example. And so, and also, I would say one interesting thing about it is that their standards are definitely based upon incentives that the state is giving to chargers. So it's kind of more of a NEVI approach. Similarly, NEVI's standards only apply to those receiving their money, versus the UK it's nationwide and it's not optional. There is no incentive money attached to their enforcement. So, and I saw Matt drop something in the chart in the messages, the veto from the governor. And in New York, the interesting thing was it was actually the implementing agency was the problem. Originally the law passed wanted the PSC to do it, and then the governor said no, actually our energy office, our equivalent of the MEA, should do it, which is actually also something similar to California, who is using their CEC, which is the equivalent of our MEA at the energy office. And so anyways, so yes, I think we're gonna have some more back and forth, and Matt, I will probably, it looks like I'll be pinging you to help us in this area. So any questions about that or statements about the other jurisdictions? All right. So that is the end of my structured portion of today. Before I go into next steps, as members, as you can all see, we have a number of we have a number of parties who are very interested in the work that is happening here, private industry and public individuals. And so my goal is at the end of each meeting, I will set aside time for them. Also, as we continue to work through this, my hope is that there will be certain topics where it makes sense to pull in the audience member, the other non-voting members into the discussion. And if there's ever a moment in time you think we would benefit from hearing from them, please let me know so I can pull them in. But when we're talking through some of this, I'm sure there'll be times it'll be good to pull in certain public individuals who might have a view on how things are going. Or as Anthony was trying to chime in, Anthony, I'm going to give you a minute here to talk about your concern or your question regarding what MDA was saying. But also, if there's a point in time where it makes sense to pull in more private industry individuals to talk to us, I think that makes sense. Also, all members here, or everyone who's on this call, if there's any issue that comes up during a meeting you think we need to look into or you have thoughts, please reach out and let me know. I'm always open to feedback and making sure that the group knows about it. So with that, it is public comment time. So Anthony from Electrify America, go ahead. And if you still want to speak to the issue, sorry about that earlier.
No, that's okay. Not to that issue specifically. I'll just acknowledge I've sort of learned the awkward way that I am not a bona fide member of this working group. Just to sort of foreshadow something that we Electrify America would be interested in is enveloping existing stations into this reporting requirement or this reporting regulatory framework. Interestingly, the bill from California was posted in the chat and mentioned a couple times. They had just stricken the piece of that proposed legislation that would have enveloped existing stations into their regulatory framework. We've supported adopting or applying the NEVI reporting requirements to stations and on like a going forward basis, but would want to talk significantly about existing stations being subject to those requirements. Existing ones that have not received public dollars.
Right, and how we go about bringing them into the framework.
Sure.
Got it. No, thank you. I see Olivia with ABB e-mobility. You mentioned the PS that actually, could you talk to what the PFC in New York has done, since it seems like you have some familiarity with it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's a lot of dialogue happening in the chat around the New York legislation. This was a very active discussion, as you can imagine. And I think there was the governor's veto amongst the agencies. There was also a sense that that legislation wasn't necessary because the state has a variety of incentive programs through utilities, through NYSERDA, and those grants and incentives already require 97% uptime. So, the legislation was not taken back up this year after the veto.
Okay, so that was 2 years ago, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Got it. Do you know if the PFC in New York regarding that 97% uptime, was that for all public? Maybe you said this and I didn't hear. Was that for all charging stations or only for utility owned and operated stations? Do you know?
So in New York, that's related to make ready incentives that utilities provide. And I believe in New York, only NYPA, which is somewhat the public utility, not any of owned chargers. The IOUs do not own and operate chargers in New York.
Got it. So if you were receiving a make ready incentive via the utility, your requirement was that's going to work 97% of the 97% of the time.
Yeah, and that's
According to the
really
figures.
for most of those incentives are really around public charging. They have separate programs for medium and heavy duty and the pilots and things, but
Got it. Thank you, Olivia. Other individuals wishing to speak up on anything that we've discussed today, thoughts on where we are going? All right. And as always, please contact me after the meeting if there's issues that you think we need to be thinking about that we aren't. We are at the very beginning of this and we want to make sure we get it right. All right. So that brings us towards the end. Was the delegate ever able to join? I don't.
If you're referring to me, I did join via voice, but I'm via voice only. I couldn't get in the video.
All right. Well, thank you for joining. I'm sorry that we had that snafu. I will figure out how we can fix that in the future, so that doesn't happen.
No worries, and thank you. I'm sorry to be late. Thank you.
All good. But you did make the most important part of the discussion, which is scheduling next meeting. Exactly. So the last thing that we need to decide upon is when we're going to have our next meeting. Delegate, just earlier in the meeting, I mentioned that the 2 times that worked best for individuals were Mondays and Fridays in the afternoon. Monday was the consensus amongst all those who had responded, from 1 to 3 or 2 to 4. My recommendation is that we meet Mondays 1 to 3 with the option to extend longer. If we want to extend longer, we would decide ahead of a meeting if we were going to have a longer than 2-hour meeting. And then for our next meeting, it would either be Monday, July 15th or Monday, July 22nd. So before we make a decision about Mondays, July 15th or 22nd, just checking, does that discussion around Monday afternoon work for you?
Yes, it does. That's great. Whatever. Yeah, I'm available.
Okay. Okay, awesome. All right, and then do people want to meet the 15th or the 22nd? The 15th would be this upcoming Monday, so that's a little less than a week. I have Senator Heddleman voting for the 15th. I myself am also in favor of the 15th since we have a number of items to get through.
Fine with me.
Ben, I just want to flag.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Josh.
Yeah, I'm likely unable to join for the 15th. Certainly not all of it, but it is what it is, right? So we're keeping the committee going. And if we do meet on the 15th, I'll obviously work to circle back afterwards.
Okay. I saw Rachel, you raised your hand, and then I'll go to Allison.
Yes. Thanks, Ben. And so I see Allison prefers the 22nd. I'm out of the country on the 15th as well. So that would mean no MDA representation on the 15th.
Okay, well, that's 2 members who are definitely out on the 15th. I know Paul is also unavailable, so that's reaching levels that are not good. Amanda, are you not available the 15th? Or are you not available the 22nd?
I'm not available 1 to 2 p.m. on the 22nd.
Okay. I will send around I'll send around a survey right after this for us to decide. I know that with 3 members, I guess really quick, Senator Heddleman, are you available on the 22nd? I know my goal is to keep us moving, but if I'm missing 3 members, I'm a little worried about having quorum on the 15th.
I'm not at that time.
Okay, so you're only available on the 15th then?
Right.
Okay, got it. All right, I will send around an email, just respond to the email. I will take whatever day has the majority. And then I'll get a notice set up with our executive secretary to go out either to hopefully tomorrow. So try to get back to that email today. All right, with that, any other business? Last thing, that Excel sheet I sent around, if you could give me your feedback, preferably 2 days ahead of the next. If our next meeting is the 15th, I won't look for feedback by the 15th. That's a little short. But if our meeting's on the 15th, I will look for feedback too. I would request feedback about 2 days ahead of time so that I can compile it into a spreadsheet for everyone. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you either on the 15th or the 22nd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank
Thanks.
you.